sorry about that. That wasn't Dallas Kamara. I thought, goodness, what's happened to his voice? It's Nat Rose, and she's singing a song called Mana Wahine from an album which has various artists on it, not just one or the other. Nat Rose and Mana Wahine on the all-night program of Radio New Zealand National. We're at 12:30. It's time for Jim Sullivan to give us this week's edition of History Repeated.
Welcome to the past. I'm Jim Sullivan. Delighted to have your company for this summer special. Hope summer's going well for you too. Of course, the summer special, if you haven't heard it before, is a chance to look back and listen back to some of the items we heard last year. And of course, we'll have a look at the big book for the 20th of January. We'll have another story from the marvellous This Is New Zealand collection. And Bridget Williams, publisher of a fine range of New Zealand books, will have a yarn to me about e-books and the way of the future.
Today in New Zealand history, the 20th of January, exchange rates on London. A very important step was taken by the New Zealand government on the 20th of January 1933 when it fixed the rate of exchange on London at about £125. That meant that £100 transferred from London to New Zealand would yield £125, while £125 was required in New Zealand to purchase £100 worth of sterling in London. The Depression was then at its height, and the farming community was severely affected by the fall in the prices of our produce overseas. It was mainly in their interest that the currency was devalued. Australia had first moved in that direction in 1929, and by the end of 1931 had fixed the exchange at £125. Our rate at the beginning of 1931 was £110. In those days, a good deal of exchange was negotiated through other channels than the banks, stock and station agencies, for instance. When the rate was fixed in 1933, the Bank of New Zealand, as agent for the government, purchased surplus exchange in London. Over £36 million was acquired in this way before August 1934. When the Reserve Bank was established, the government took control of the whole of the exchange. The high rate of exchange, which was, of course, a charge upon the whole population, lasted for 15 years. During that time, owing mainly to considerable increases in the level of produce prices overseas, the situation of the country was greatly strengthened. Bulk purchasing was introduced, and Parliament passed measures providing guaranteed prices for dairy produce, price tribunals, and stabilization to control increases, and widespread mortgage adjustments. The government also made long-term contracts with Great Britain, which gave an assured market for dairy produce and meat. The wool producers did not come into the price guarantee. The state of the farming industry was so much better after the war, and the disequilibrium between prices in New Zealand and elsewhere was so great, that it was considered advisable in 1948 to restore the currency to parity with sterling. It was an auspicious time, since contracts with Great Britain had just been revised, with increases in the prices which were calculated to yield several millions a year extra to New Zealand producers. No legislation or new regulation was necessary, since the Reserve Bank has power to control exchange. In order to avoid speculation, no prior announcement was made. When the then Minister of Finance, Mr. Nash, had completed reading his budget speech, he announced verbally that the government had decided to restore New Zealand currency to parity with sterling. The banks opened next morning to do business on equal terms with London. The adverse exchange had effected its purpose. As Australia remained on the high exchange, there was some slight disturbance of trading relations with the Commonwealth. Our fish became harder to sell across the Tasman. On the other hand, considerable Australian capital came to New Zealand for investment in the wood pulp industry. These considerations apart, the return to parity was generally regarded as a restoration of national self-respect.
And of course, while I'm no economist, I suppose if we still had parity, 2 New Zealand dollars would these days equal £1, 1 British pound, but that's not the case at all. In the year 1812, William Fox was born in Durham, England. He was later 4 times Prime Minister or Premier of New Zealand. He emigrated in 1842 and was employed by the New Zealand Company. On this day in 1843, Wellington's chief policeman, Michael Murphy, was forced to resign. He had been efficient, but rumours of cheating at cards at the Wakefield Club were compounded by his frequently rostering one constable on night duty so that Murphy and the constable's wife could share a bed. And while the constable gave his officer a thrashing, Murphy's resignation was officially for using a constable on unofficial business, which I suppose could just as easily be using a constable's wife on unofficial business. One more from the book for this day, January the 20th, 1845. Governor Fitzroy offered the first reward in New Zealand, £100 for the capture of Honaheke, who'd cut down the flagpole at Kororaraka 3 times. Heke offered a similar reward for the capture of Fitzroy, but neither reward was claimed in the end. On this day, January the 20th, in 1902, the trial began in Christchurch of George Mumford, the captain of the Ariadne, which had gone aground in mysterious circumstances on the North Otago coast in 1901. Also on trial were the ship's owner, F.C. Carey of England, and E.J. Frank, a crew member. After 5 days, only Mumford was found guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The whole business was an insurance scam which went wrong. One more from earlier, 1846 on this day, the first steam-driven vessel in New Zealand, HMS Driver, arrived in Watamata Harbour. She could be rig-rigged for sail and was a paddle steamer of 1,058 tons. She carried 4 large guns and had a crew of 175. She took troops to Wellington to help repress the Rangahatia's warriors who were terrorising many of the settlers in the Hutt Valley. More from the big book for the 20th of January a little later on this summer special edition.